Hi everyone, my name is Sandi Caldrone. I am the outreach specialist for the Purdue University Research Repository, or PUR for short. So PUR is a data repository. We're a part of the libraries here at Purdue, and we publish research data sets that were created here by our faculty, staff, and students. We also provide a host of other tools and resources related to data management. So that's what I want to talk to you about today, some of those that may make sense for you. So this workshop's at the end of the semester. Many of you have recently finished up research projects. Maybe you've just participated in the OUR poster session. So now what do you do with your data when your research project comes to an end? We're going to talk about that. So we'll talk about how to wrap up a data project the right way. By the way, apologies if you hear my dog in the background. Just one of the many delights of working from home. But yeah, so we will talk about how to wrap up a data project, possibly get author credit for your work, and how you can communicate your data management skills on your resume or grad school application. So no matter what your research topic is, there should be 4 main items on your post-research data to-do list, and we're going to go over each of these. Those are capturing metadata, considering publication for your data, backing up and archiving data, and updating your data-related skills on your resume or CV. So first on the list, capturing metadata. Now you've already been working with data, so you know that metadata is basically data about data, like labels and units of measurement, that kind of thing. Metadata basically provides essential context for your data. And when we're talking about a completed data set, like from a project that's wrapping up, that context usually comes in a few different forms. So that would be metadata that describes the whole data set, which could encompass many different files. A data dictionary defining any key terms or unique abbreviations or acronyms, and a README file giving a brief overview of the research and in plain language just explaining some of that essential context that's necessary to understand the data set. Now, sometimes these features might come in separate documents. Sometimes they're all covered in a really well-organized README file. And actually, sometimes they're not present at all, but we want to avoid those bad habits. So when we're wrapping up a research project, the kind of metadata that we want to gather at that point is metadata about the whole data set. So this describes the data set as a whole, whether it's one file or many files, and that includes information like title, author, a summary or abstract of the research object, and then if you are sharing or publishing your data, you might also include a recommended citation so that other people, if you're sharing your work, other people can cite you and give you credit for it. You can also, if you're sharing your work, provide a license attached to it that dictates how that work can be reused. Now those don't apply necessarily to data sets that you're saving just for your own personal future use, but they do apply to those that you would share or publish. And actually, let's take a look at an example of a published data set in PUR so you can see what that looks like. So I have here a screen capture of a data set that's been published in PUR. All data sets we publish come with a web page like this that has dataset metadata and the option to download the data files themselves. I've chosen this particular data set because it includes undergraduate authors. And if you click the link in this slide, you can look up the data set yourself on PUR if you're interested and actually download the files and take a look at those. So here on the per page, we see dataset metadata like title, authors, brief description. In this case, it's just a couple sentences. In other cases, if you look on per, you might find some that are a couple of paragraphs, but it's generally within that range. You'll see some other items on this page that are specific to publication, like we assign each dataset a DOI, or digital object identifier, that helps people cite it. We also have a link to license information that's dictating how this data can be reused. Now, one thing that I do want to stress about this data set metadata like this is, even if you're not publishing or sharing your data and you're just keeping it for your own potential future use, it's really important that you write these things down now while they're still fresh in your mind, because I can guarantee you that future you will not remember these details. And then one essential aspect of the context for this data set that you don't see itself on the per website is a README file, and that's because it's available for download. So if you download this data set, you will find a README file associated with it that is auto-generated by the per system as a text file that just gives you a lot of the metadata that we see right here. And then you'll also find a README file provided by the researchers with the kind of context that we've been talking about. So let's talk a little bit more about what a README file is. Even if you're not planning on sharing your data, it's important to keep track of this information for your own future use. You'll be glad you did if you try to use your data again in the future. And so a README file is intended to be a very simple file that provides the basic context necessary to understand, interpret, and reuse this data set. Most README files are either in a plain text format, so that would be saved as a .txt file, or as a PDF. We recommend these over saving word processing files, just because you might need the, whatever program was used to create that file in order to open it up. So text files and PDF files are something that pretty much anyone can open with a number of different programs. And so a good README file provides all of the necessary information in the simplest way possible. There's no one universal template for creating one because each project is different, but there are some basic elements you should make sure to always include. And so those are a research description. This can be anything from a couple of sentences to a couple of paragraphs, describing the purpose of the research, your data collection methods, maybe noting what analyses you conducted. And note if this research is tied to any larger project. So if you're working on one slice of a larger project that your faculty advisor is heading up, this would be a good place to reference that. It's also very helpful to note the instruments and software you used to collect or analyze your data. And that includes making a note of the version of software that you used, and if you're using any specialized collection instruments, any relevant calibrations that would be important to other people trying to interpret your data. Your README file should also include some kind of file manifest, or a list, a brief description of the files in your data set. And this doesn't have to be an extraordinarily detailed list, just a clue to what someone would find in each of these files. Now, if you're working with hundreds and hundreds of tiny files, of course you don't need to list them all out individually, but group them together in some kind of easily understandable way and then provide a description of each of those groups. And then something else that's always helpful to include is a data dictionary. Sometimes people provide this as a separate file, sometimes within the README file. Either way is fine, but what's key about a data dictionary is that it's going to define all of your key terms, abbreviations, acronyms, and IDs that are referenced in your data files themselves. And so that might look something like this. This is an example of a data dictionary that I pulled from the PUR dataset that's linked below. This data set happens to be tabular, so we have spreadsheets of data. And so this dictionary that the authors have provided lists all of the columns in their spreadsheet, the column ID, which in this case is a letter. It might also be a term or number. And then a brief description of the content one should find in that column. This is a very simple thing to do, but it is extraordinarily helpful to anyone else who's going to be looking at your data, including you further down the line. What you can't see here, but you can see if you choose to click the link below and actually download these data and README files for yourselves, is that the README file for this publication also includes notes about units of measurement and collection methods. So this goes a long way towards making this data reusable, which really is the end goal for all published data sets. So speaking of published data sets, the second item on our to-do list is considering publication. If you've never considered this before, I'd like you to think it over. Publishing a data set is a great learning experience. It also gives you an authorship credit that you can add to your resume, CV, or grad school application. And every researcher considering publishing their data has to strike the right balance between sharing and safeguarding. The goal is to make data as freely available as possible and also as secure as necessary. And where the right balance is going to vary for each data set. So some factors to consider are reasons that you may want to publish and share your data. These are things like often a funder or a publisher may require data publication. This is very common. So if you stay within academia, it's something that you're likely to run into. It's a motivation for many people who publish their data. But there are other very good motivations as well, such as sharing your data with other folks within your scientific community, just to advance the discipline itself. And also it may allow others to validate your work. So sharing your data, if you're also sharing your results in a conference or poster or an article, sharing your data makes that research more transparent and allows others to validate your results. And for students, I also recommend that if you can, publishing your data gives you an author credit. And it is often an easier type of credit to achieve than a journal publication or conference presentation. And that's in part because we have the PUR data repository here at Purdue and myself and other PUR team members who are available to help you through that process. Now, of course, publication isn't going to be right for all data sets. Some data is confidential and can't be shared. That may be because you're working with human subjects, in which case you would be familiar with the IRB restrictions that apply to your research project that may limit what you are able to share with others. If you're not working with human subjects, you may also have intellectual property concerns. Sometimes this comes into play, especially if we're looking at partnering with folks in industry or trying to set up a new startup. Sometimes people don't want to share their data because they're intending to trade on it. And it's also possible that the content of your research might have some legal restrictions on what can and cannot be shared. Now, of course, these are all things you would want to definitely talk over with whoever your faculty advisor is. But you also have the option to talk to us at the PUR team. This is my email address, and I'm the main point of contact for the team. A lot of what I do is consultations with researchers, so you definitely don't have to make these decisions alone. We're here to help you. We can talk over email or set up a meeting to talk about your data. I'd also recommend that you take a look at some of the data sets published in PUR. We have about 1,000 published data sets in our collection. Check out this LibGuide for a directory of sample data sets that represents various types of data from departments all over campus. The link is provided below. All of these data sets are freely available to download and to even reuse. Now, you're welcome to also go directly to the PUR website and browse through our data sets. But if you're looking for a particular field or a particular kind of data, please do take a look at this LibGuide because it has some very helpful lists available that link directly to relevant data sets. Now, if you do decide to publish your data in PUR, this is a quick look at what that process looks like. We have online tools that make it as easy as we can for you to publish your data. We also have short video tutorials on the PUR website. The link is provided here that will guide you every step of the way. And you can also always reach out to me for help. I'm happy to sit down with you and help you to upload your files and provide a good description for them. And I also want to note that while the PUR website has some self-service options, so you can entirely independently upload your files and submit them for publication, nothing will go live on the PUR website until it's been reviewed and approved by a member of the PUR team. And this is kind of a safety net for you. So you can go through, draft a publication and submit it for review. If we have any questions about it or need any more information, someone from the PUR team will reach out to you, just so you know that someone else is going to look it over before it goes live, and we can help catch anything that might be missing. Now, one of the benefits of publishing your data in PUR is that we, the PUR team in the libraries, will archive it for you, and you'll be able to access it on the PUR website. Even after you graduate from Purdue, our data sets will stay up on our website in perpetuity. So that is one benefit, is it makes backing up and archiving much easier on you. Now, if publication isn't right for you, you'll definitely want to make sure that you know a thing or two about digital preservation. And you might think, isn't that just saving files? I already know how to do that. And no, it's different, because there's a difference between saving and preserving that I want to talk about briefly. So saving is passive. You're basically choosing not to delete something. It's like putting a book on a shelf and then forgetting about it and leaving it there, and it'll be waiting for you when you're ready to return to it. Preservation is more active. Preservation is about ensuring that the stuff you're saving is both accessible and usable. It's more like looking after a houseplant that needs the right environment and some attention from you on a regular basis. And so in our case, the houseplants are digital data files. And so when I talk about digital preservation, I really mean a series of managed activities, policies, steps that ensure the accurate rendering of digital content for as long as necessary, even facing challenges of media failure, so if your storage device fails, or technological change. Would you easily be able to open a WordPerfect file from 20 years ago if I sent one to you? Probably not. That's the kind of technological change we have to think about when we think about digital preservation. And basically, we're talking about not just being able to locate your file, but being able to open and actually use it. And that largely depends on the file format. A digital file can become unopenable after just a few years if you're not careful. And so the best way to mitigate that risk is to save your work in an archival file format. So these are file formats that digital archivists think will survive the longest and will be the easiest to access over the long term. These are kind of the gold standard of digital preservation. And so the types of files that are usually designated as preferred archival file formats they often come from open source software that anyone can download for free. And so here you'll see a couple of examples of recommended file formats for different types of files. And there are many more recommendations on the PUR website at the link below. You will probably notice what is not on this list, and that is popular proprietary formats like Microsoft Office files or MATLAB, for example. And that's because you need to pay for the right software to access those files. Software that you might not have access to after you leave Purdue. But that certainly doesn't mean that you shouldn't use these types of programs. They're enormously useful. So if you are using proprietary software to create your data files, what we usually recommend then is then when it comes time to save your files, ideally it would be best to save them in two different formats. So you'd have the same file in the proprietary format that's native to that software, so you can easily plug it back into the software tool and reuse it. And then ideally also the same information in an archival format, like a plain text or a CSV file or a TIFF image file. And you also want to be sure, especially when you're using proprietary software, to make a note somewhere of not just the name of the software you used, but also the version you used to create your files. That can be very helpful if we're looking at a digital file a few years down the road and trying to figure out exactly what program we need in order to be able to open it. So now let's talk about another aspect of digital preservation, and that is the storage media that you use for storing and backing up your files. So it pays to have a 3-2-1 backup strategy, and that means keeping 3 copies of important files on at least 2 different kinds of storage, and ideally having one of those stored at a remote location. So this doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as simple as keeping copies of files on your computer hard drive, on an external hard drive, and in the cloud. And that would be your 3 copies in 2 different kinds of storage. And your cloud storage could be considered a remote location. Now, if you have 2 different kinds of physical storage, like a computer hard drive and an external hard drive or USB drive, it's ideal if you can keep one of those in a different building. So you have your computer at home, maybe your backup hard drive or USB is at the lab in Purdue where you're working, for example. Now, I trust that you are all going to adhere to a very responsible 3-2-1 backup strategy. But just in case, I also want to talk briefly about some common practices that don't actually count as a backup. So on our not really a backup list, we have keeping a USB drive next to your PC. If you're keeping your backup copies with the original copies of your files and the space where you're holding both of those floods or there's a fire, all of your copies are destroyed. So in that case, that type of backup doesn't fully protect you. Some of us are very dependent on cloud storage and sometimes might even keep extra copies of important files in different parts of the same cloud storage solution. That may protect you from any accidental damage that you might do to one of your copies of your files, but it doesn't protect you if there's a problem with Google Drive, for example. So you want to make sure that you diversify more than that. You also want to make sure that if you're using a storage solution that's provided by Purdue, that you're not assuming that ITEP is just doing all of the backing up for you. Now, of course, ITAP provides very robust backup solutions for all of their kinds of storage, but those are primarily backups for ITAP purposes. They're not really intended for helping you when you accidentally delete or destroy one of your files. You need to be responsible for backups in those cases. So don't assume that just because you're using an ITAP solution that their backups will always be able to save you if something goes wrong. It's also very helpful to keep more than one version of active files, especially if those files are being edited by different members of a research group. So it's helpful to keep a few different versions of backup files in case you realize that a mistake was made and need to retrace your steps and go back to a time before that mistake was made. So if you have a really great backup schedule and you back up your files every single week, but every week you replace that backup with a new copy, then if you realize further down the road that you made a mistake a month ago, that really great weekly backup isn't going to help you. So it's very helpful to keep a copy of a backup file at different stages throughout your project. And then the last, not a backup that I want to mention is setting an auto backup and then not checking up on it. This is one I can speak to from bitter experience. Before I came to Purdue, I worked for a nonprofit in Chicago where one of my duties was managing our server. We had a small shop, we had a local server that served all of our computers, and we had an automatic backup set to it to back up all of our files. One day we came into the office and the server had just completely and irrevocably died. But we thought we'd be okay. We're just going to plug in our backup and refresh all of our files, which worked beautifully for about 70% of our files. And we were missing the other 30% that they were not covered in the backup. And our automatic backup solution didn't alert us with any kind of error message. We didn't know what we were missing until we went to go look for it. So please do learn from my mistake and don't make it yourself. If you set up an automatic backup solution, go open those files every once in a while and just make sure they're all there. Now let's get a little more specific and talk about your actual data storage options. You have a lot of storage solutions to choose from. I want to touch on some of the most popular ones, including which of those are offered through Purdue. So there's no one best storage solution, but this decision tree walks you through the important distinctions. So first you'll want to think about the total size of your data files. If you're working with big data, so more than a few gigabytes of files, that is really going to limit your options. You can see on the right that Purdue storage options provide you with a lot more space than the free public options. Purdue options also have the added bonus of on-campus tech support, which is why I generally recommend them over public options like Google or Dropbox. However, the public options have one key advantage, which is that you can still access them after you leave Purdue. So that's very important to think about in terms of long-term storage and archiving. Of course, if you are able to publish your data on Pur, we'll take care of that archiving for you and you'll be able to access it on our website. Now, finally, I want to talk briefly about communicating your data management skills. Data management is relevant to any and every field, and it doesn't hurt to spell out your knowledge and experience on your resume or CV. Now, you could just say that you have experience with the data management lifecycle, but it's better to be more specific. So here I have some handy terms and simple phrases you can use to communicate what you've learned and practiced during your research experience. And so you might talk about what you've learned about particular data collection methods used throughout the course of your research, If you've been working with a faculty advisor in a lab or a research group, maybe you've learned protocols for working within that group to make sure everyone's on the same page. If you're working with sensitive data, maybe you have learned security procedures for keeping that data safe. It's also very helpful to actually list out any specific tools or instruments and software that you have used to collect or analyze or visualize data. And then in terms of experience, you can talk about work you've done, and you might have experience with any or all of these aspects of the data management lifecycle, and everything from kind of data collection up through analysis and publication and preservation. And if you do publish your data, you'll of course also want to include a citation like the one you see in fine print here. You can also include statistics about page views and downloads. PUR provides these for all of the data sets that we publish so that you can track your impact. And you can see these on the web page of any PUR data set that you look at. And that brings us to the end of our workshop. I hope this has been helpful for you and that you now have a better idea of how to wrap up a research project involving data. I've referenced a handful of links in my slides, and I've compiled them all here for easy access for you. And thank you so much for your time and your attention. And remember, you can always reach out to me with questions. That's why I'm here. Thanks.